Hello, welcome to all of you zooming in from California and other parts of the world. We're here to celebrate Kim Abel as part of the WEED Art plus Activism series number 13. And she will be presenting Art as a Tool. Women's Eco-Artist Dialogue, our organization, was founded in 1996 and is a volunteer-run collective of female-identified visual artists, writers, curators, art historians, researchers, scientists, and others interested in highlighting the intersection of art and ecological issues. I'm Mary White, one of the co-chairs, along with co-chair Minouche Zomaradinia, and several other WEED board members who are here, Sharon Siskin, and there might be others. We'll start with a land acknowledgement. And if you wish, please add your location and land acknowledgement in the chat. WEED's office sits on the territory of the Wichen, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chichonyo-speaking Ohlone people, the successors of the sovereign Verona Band of Alameda County, near one of the largest shell mounds in the Bay Area. The land was and continues to be of great importance to the Muwekma Ohlone tribe and other familiar descendants of the Verona Band. We recognize the Muwekma Ohlone tribe, who are campaigning to become federally recognized, the Association of Ramaytush Ohlone, who are researching, revitalizing, and preserving Ramaytush Ohlone history and culture, and the Federated Village of Lezon and the Sogorea Land Trust, who are working to return native land back to indigenous stewardship, including a few blocks away from me in Berkeley. A little Zoom housekeeping. We're recording this presentation, and please keep your audio muted during the presentation. The hosts may mute you if there's extra noise. If you have questions during the presentation, please put them in the chat for the questions and answers section. We will stop the first part of the recording after Kim's presentation and then immediately start a second recording for questions and answers. So now I'd like to introduce Kim Abel. Kim?
Oh,
well,
thanks so much.
Oh, just a minute. Let me read your bio.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
And it's Abelees.
Abelees. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Kim will talk about her survey exhibition at CSU Sacramento, which is up right now. Kim Abelees Smog Collectors, 1987 to 2002, was an NEA-funded project which involved, she'll also talk about an NEA project which involved a residency at the Institute of Forest Genetics and the Valises for Campground in collaboration with Camp 13, a group of female prison inmates who fight wildfires. Permanent outdoor works include sculptural citizen seeds, along with the Playa Trail in Los Angeles, and Walk a Mile in My Shoes, based on the shoes of the civil rights marchers and local activists. Kim explores society, science, literacy, feminism, and the environment, creating projects with science and natural history museums, health departments, air pollution control agencies, and the National Park Service. NEA-funded projects in So I guess that's other part was already done. Kim has received fellowships from the Guggenheim Memorial Foundation, the J. Paul Getty Trust Fund, and her process documents are archived at the Center for Art and Environment. Her work is in the public collections, including MoCA, LACMA, CAAM, Berkeley Art Museum, and National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. Her Smog Collectors exhibition was also presented at CSU Fullerton and is now, as I said, at CSU Sacramento. And her show, Social Furniture, will open in the Ronald Silverman Fine Arts Gallery in Los Angeles in September of 2003. Recent publications about her projects include New York Times, Los Angeles Times, The Atlantic magazine, and the book Social Practice, Technologies for Change, published in 2022. So with no more ado, I'd like to introduce Kim.
Oh, thanks so much, Mary. And actually also thanks Manoush for helping all this happen. The book that Mary just mentioned, I see Beverly Natus is in the crowd, and Beverly is in that book also. I just wanted to call it out. It's a really very wonderful book, especially if you're teaching and are interested in community-based work. So I'm going to share my screen now, and it looks like everybody's gone off of video. So that'll help because I will show a few videos in the presentation. And thanks so much, everybody, for being here. Let's see, slideshow, here we go. Okay, does this look good, Mary? And
Yes.
or anybody that can tell me? Okay.
Yes. Sounds
All
good.
right. Okay. Thanks so much. So I really wanted to craft this talk for you so that I hope that it gives some ideas in terms of ways of working for some of you. I know a lot of you that I saw in the list who are attending already do community-based work, but some of you that maybe think about it, maybe this is a time to find other strategies for bringing your work out of the studio, so to speak, and into a broader sense of the world rather than the limited art world that we usually are part of. I am part of that world too. I don't mean to misrepresent myself, but it's really important for me to straddle all kinds of ways of not only making work, but also communicating with the pieces. So I wanted to start first with the idea of portable art. And Mary had mentioned the Valises for campground. That project actually started earlier, this idea of making suitcases in 1993. I made this storm drain dolphin suitcase by welding a framework in the shape of the dolphin and going with my daughter, who's featured there in the lower right, after a storm to the beach and collecting all the trash and then sorting it out and putting it onto this piece that I could then take into classrooms. Any of you that are young parents out there, I realized later that a lot of my projects actually aligned with the age of my daughter Zoe, so that in this case, she was in about the 3rd grade, and I did take this suitcase into not only her classroom, but a lot of classrooms in the LUSD area. And now it actually, the Institute of Contemporary Art in San Diego, they teach people to go around to schools and do the same thing I did. So it's using a suitcase like this to teach not only about trash and also the storm drain system, but also about consumption. Because for me, with all the trash pieces that I've done through the years, it all really narrows down to the fact that we're really consuming too much and always having somebody else clean up after us. So the idea of these valises was really of interest to me because I really thought it was, as a person making sculpture, a challenge to make these things function, and also a way to actually bring the art to a group as opposed to assuming that they would come to a venue. The valises are now in the collection of the LA County Arts and Culture. So primarily they're used by National Park Service as well as the LA County Fire, and they can be borrowed and used for various events. And in the case of these, they're really used to teach about the fire prevention, fire abatement, and in particular, the firefighting women of Camp 13. For 6 months, I worked with women that are in a kind of open air prison facility above Malibu, California, and they're taught to be firefighters. And it was really a process. One thing that I often say about this experience is that it crossed my mind that so often when I was working with groups, whether they were in halfway houses or even in teaching, through school, that people had to work with me. And it was really a profound thing to realize that maybe they don't want to work with me. And so I had to really gain a lot of trust with the women when we were making these valises. And it just became a turning point for me in working with people to realize I had kind of understood that I wasn't ever to go into a community situation and act like I had all the answers for something, whatever the subject was or whatever our goal was. But it was a little bit different issue, realizing that all my efforts to level the playing field, as I say, in terms of the way we would talk about the project and plan and work, that I really had to push it further than I ever had before. So I was grateful in a more general way about working with people about what this experience did. This is one example, and I'm going to show you a little slide presentation of it. But what I really want to point out for you here is you see all the agencies that are part of this project. So when we work as community artists, or in maybe, sometimes it's more like a public art project in the more conventional sense you're thinking about, with permanent pieces. It's really important to love that idea that when you're in a meeting and everybody's got their opinion, that everybody's opinion has a value to it. And all these people around the table bring something that I cannot as an individual bring. And I must say that whenever these pieces are being developed and they're all public art stuff is kind of meeting laden, if that's a term, it should be a term, that the topics or the subject or the questions that people bring up that really freak me out during the meeting are the ones I actually take home and have really made major understandings of where the artwork ought to go, like how the process should develop further. And I know that sometimes there's that term art by committee, and I think that's why some artists just don't want to get involved with making art with others, and I can understand that. But the idea of working with people, for me, I always explain it as like this Dada experience, like the Dadaist, if they made a poem, would throw words up in the air and however they fell, that's what the poem was. Well, it's kind of like these people that I'm working with are all part of the way the structure starts changing and so on. So there are 10 valises in all. The women did not have to work with me. And I know I said that in a different way when I started talking about this piece, but in other words, I brought up materials and I brought my skill sets. And if the women wanted to work on something else, because a lot of times, especially on free days in the prisons, that's when they really want to make gifts for their friends or their family or their children, then I was there to really help them to make that piece also for themselves. And then slowly people wanted to work on this. It helped a little bit because my birthday happened at some point during this, and everybody as a gift jumped in to help. And then some of the women actually found out that they really enjoyed this kind of larger project that they knew would be out in the public and would not only tell about how they do their firefighting and all this hard labor they do for the abatement, to clear the lands and help before the fires and during the fires and after the fires. And they were very proud of these. The women that I met I work with about 80 women in all through that period of time, and they're very proud of the work that they do. And they're particularly proud when they have kids that come and visit, and their kids think they're superheroes, right? So it's really a beautiful experience in that. So this one, for instance, has every tool that they have when they're doing their work. And some of the ideas came about. The one with the tools, for instance, I brought Sculpey up one time and people were making all kinds of things. But one of the women came up and she's like, "Oh, Kim, look, this is the way our tools look." And I said, "Oh my gosh, we should make all of them." And everybody was all enthusiastic. So we all chipped in and really spent a couple months making all those miniature tools. Some of these, like the one you see there, parts come out. This one tells causes of fires. On the front of that one, actually, it tells the major fires that have happened in California. The crochet is actually done by the women who taught other women how to do crochet. I don't really know how to do it. People were volunteering to teach, and everybody did a line or two of that landscape with the knitted crochet. And this is actually to show the idea of how you should clear around your homes. This is actually a model I made of our house in Crestline, and I photographed all around the house and then assembled it into a three-dimensional model of the house with the good clearing and the bad mess on one side or the other of that valise. So, these valises, as you see from this video, they get activated. They're often needing to be exhibited on a pedestal or a table, but really when they're best, of course, is when someone is using them as a tool to tell key points about this fire prevention. And so the talking points really vary depending on who's giving the presentation and what the goal is. If it's one of the rangers, maybe they're talking more about wildlife and our relationship to nature. Whereas if it's from the LA County Fire, we set up, and it's really a lot about how to clear around your property. The materials are all different from one another. These are built from the ground up. They're made to be very durable so that they can really handle all this. That storm drain dolphin suitcase that I showed you, that was, what did I say, mid 90s that I made that. I recently actually had to restore that because it had gone to like thousands of classrooms, and so there's a lot of wear and tear on it, but they're really built so that they can handle that. I think I'll do just a little bit more of this. And this one's the shape of a chainsaw. And again, the idea is really to combine the art as a way to get somebody curious about wanting to know this information. Everything has to be very tactile, and people can actually touch these things when they're on exhibition and so on. And then this is the last one, stewardship. Because in the end, all of these are gearing up toward this idea that we need to take care of this earth around us. And the idea of stewardship is really a common thread that runs through any of these. So I wanted to talk a little bit about this idea of opportunities for experiments. And some of this has to do with residencies. This is actually a piece I made charting the path of the moon and the sun when I was at Handheld Foundation, which was a sculptural residency run by George Rickey and his crew in upstate New York. And this one was a more recent one at Montalvo. And the opportunity that I'm talking about is really observed through this piece. I realized that because I was on this residency, every piece of trash that I was generating in the live workspace that they gave me was just mine. And normally I live with a household of family. And so this idea that I could sort of decipher what trash I had caused was of interest to me. And I really tried to do just the same bad thing I was always doing. I tried not to censor how bad I am about consumption myself. And part of the interest was like, what does it really take to take those bags of trash that you just saw and, as I say here, dissect and dismantle and mince every millimeter of it. And so the fact that it goes so far, you know, at first you're just cutting these little strips of packaging and everything seems so neat and tidy. But as the process goes on, you know, I'm having to put them through paper shredders and so on. So in the end, this hope chest, which is hopefully has this not only humorous but potential title to it, is made up of every inch, every centimeter, every millimeter of all that trash that I made. And I take this around and I try to use it as a tool, kind of like the Valises, to teach people and encourage them to do composting. In the end, what you have is a bag of compost. If you've taken all your trash in that and you've minced all the paper, all the plastic, all that stuff, all the metal, then you're ending up with this. And that's when I started raising red wiggler worms, which kind of amp up the composting process. And the thing with composting, and when I tell Europeans this when we're working on projects, they act like, oh gosh, Kim, everybody knows this. But I'm always surprised how few people do compost that I personally know. And the thing that composting really does, it allowed me to really see my consumption close up. So in other words, I feel strongly that if you start composting, you start really observing all your patterns of how you buy stuff and what you do with it and so on. So a lot of these projects for me as a teaching tool, as an art tool, are really about sort of a bouncing off place for people to go to the next level of what they can do to live a more clean existence. Resilience was a piece that I did with another residency at the Institute of Forest Genetics. Some of you may know that place. It's up in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. And the idea for the project was that I would be able to live on this National Park Service land in a cabin for a few months, but I would also be doing a project with a local high school. So several things were happening with this. So what this institute actually is, it was started in the early 1900s. A gentleman with the last name of Eddy wanted to bring it turned out to be 97 examples of conifers from around the world and plant them in this area in order to study them. And what his interest really was to clone them together. Well, that didn't work. If you go up there, you see all these Frankenstein trees up there. But the interesting thing that happened is that because he had planted these and had marked the elevations and where they were from and when they were planted and all this material, they now can use this to study climate change. And they do now the kind of research is really related to DNA to see what kind of conifers are actually more resilient. So it's a beautiful story of the unexpected ending for somebody that had a vision over 100 years ago, and now it's really useful material. The work with the kids had to do the same thing with the idea of resilience, and I was giving them projects like what color is a resilient color for you if you want that empowerment. And the answer red or blue was not the answer. It was really specific about mixing paint colors and so on. So it was really about trying to understand what symbols meant something to you related to what is resilient within your own life as well as the forest. We did different things like going to the Institute. We did other kind of field trips. The students were given cameras at one point. I love this photograph by Catherine Gray. It's just such a beautiful photograph. And so there were different ways that the students worked. I was really eager for them to think in detail and in minutia, and then to build off of that and to build from that. So I think I'll turn the sound off on this, but so one of the things I did up there, they had all these research trees, as I said, and each tree is actually labeled. So you know when the tree was planted and the name of the tree and its location and the essential data for it. And so I photographed 5 of the trees very carefully in the round and assembled all those images using Photoshop and then had them printed on silk. And they're called breathing trees. And what happens is the slightest movement in the room when you're near these, they begin to breathe and move. And it was really important to me. You see the tags on them. So that is the tag for that tree. So it's not just any tree, it's really the specific tree. And in that way, they really act as portraits of these living beings. And again, there are threads that go through the work. A lot of it is really wanting people to start looking closely at the environment around them and really take advantage of what it means to be a person in nature, as nature, not just looking at it, but as part of it, and what that means. So this is where I'm curious if this will resonate with any of you. And I know, like I said, there are community-based artists that I saw you in the list of people who are here. So you have plenty to explain to everybody also. So this idea that, like we typically start in a studio situation doing our personal work, as I usually see it, and in my own experience. And then the gallery is the more typical place where we want to show the work and partake in our art community. And then for me, there was always this third link that I needed, which was workshops or working with community in some kind of collaboration. And it's really that I think of almost all my projects as a potential for a workshop for other people to begin their own dialogue about their environment. The smog collectors are probably the most obvious case, and I'm not so sure they're the first community-based piece I did, but I've given really scores of workshops about how to make the smog collectors. And I've had different books written so that you can do it yourself, or teachers asked me. LAUSD did a citywide project in various locations. I've done them. Mary had mentioned the exhibit that started at Cal State Fullerton, and it was curated by Jennifer Frias. And now it's actually up at Cal State Sacramento. So you could see it there. It's there the full semester. And this is actually one of the pieces. This is a 15-foot tall smog collector. And for some of you that don't know about this work, it's a method that I developed in the early 1980s. And basically I make a stencil and I put it on different objects and materials, and I place them on a rooftop. And the smog is very heavy, you know, it's made out of heavy metals. Emissions from cars and trucks and boats and planes are the primary cause of all that oil product that ends up there. But also if you're near a factory, it'll be factory emissions. Or now there's this worry about the dust, as you know, the lands are changing, and a lot of the dust has pesticides and chemicals that also become airborne. So when the stencil is removed, the image is made from that smog. I'm not showing you a lot of examples of these, but I did, if you've never seen them before, wanted to give you a sense of it. Probably the most well-known series of this is this series. There's 17 in all, and you're seeing 6 here, the presidential commemorative smog plates. These are all the presidents from McKinley to Bush, and they're left out longer if their environmental records are bad. So I worked with a historian, Bill Weeks, and he helped me, figure out, not only I could research what the president said, but what I wanted to know is what happened. Like, people can say anything, but what was really the outcome of their presidencies? So he helped me kind of rate them. So they were left out as short as 4 days. And you can see Teddy Roosevelt and Carter, I felt pretty good about. And Ronald Reagan was out for 40 days. So you can get a sense of it. The quotes are actually, they're quotes about the environment or industry. A lot of the early presidents, they're very inspirational quotes. They're, Woodrow Wilson kind of warned about the dangers of our industrial decisions. More recently, I did a project with the Garage Museum of Contemporary Art in Moscow, and they had known of my work, and they were doing a big show that would be international, and it would really be about the politics of the future being the environmental concerns. So they had asked me if I would do a piece, and I gave them a list of the topics. Of course, I've done a lot with like human body, causes and effects of smog. There's like a long list of things. American painting, paintings like Durand paintings and stuff, and then translating them into smog. And they ended up saying, no, we want the political figures. So it seemed like a good strategy or framework to figure out some of the speeches that had been done at some of the COP meetings, the International Environmental Climate Summits. And so that's what these quotes are. They're written on the plate in the language that the leader originally presented the speech with. And then as the viewer, you can see the translation on the text, on the wall text. These were done in several places. This is actually the set I made in Los Angeles, but we did a full set in Moscow. And then I got so interested in this project because it just opened up a lot of ideas about the leadership we have today. And we are really in need of some strong leadership, and we just really do not have that. So there were about half of them that I could actually find people in the capitals of the leaders to put the stencil plates out. So on some of the people, I have the smog from their capital cities. Last year, I worked on a project that could be a whole lecture, actually. And one of the key points for me was working with Kissy Deborah. Rosamond's daughter passed away 10 years ago, actually, this month. And she died from an asthma attack. And the thing that is so powerful about Rosamond is that she made the coroner write on the death certificate that her daughter had died of air pollution. So it's really intense. I was so profoundly moved when I heard about her. And Joe Pearl is an artist in the UK who connected with Rosamond, and Rosamond agreed to put one of the long stencils in her yard. And actually on the right there, you see the stencil from her yard. And I will say that Rosamond has this foundation called the Ella Roberta Family Foundation. And so I just want to make clear that Rosamond is very active politically, and is constantly pressuring, like the mayor Sadiq Khan, to really make progress. Well, the thing is, like, people always ask me with the smog work, well, isn't it better outside? I get that all the time. And I think about it a lot because there's a part of me that thinks, yeah, I guess it is. But you know what? It really depends what area you are in. That's why it is a social justice issue. So that if you live in certain areas near freeways or where manufacturing is done, for instance, you still have very serious air pollution problems there. This is not to misunderstand that the air pollution does push, as that same historian Bill Weeks said to me, when I asked him, like, why do they call George Bush the environmental president? What was that about again? That they just pushed manufacturing overseas, but the winds bring it back, all that pollution that manufacturing does. So it's a very complex issue. I've done other projects with citywide projects. There have been a few of them. This one was with the Bureau of Automotive Repair. And the idea is that people could see the pollution being accumulated, and following that, they traveled to 200 companies to try to encourage rideshare. When we had the Bobcat fires, I'm in Pasadena right now, and they happened over the hill, I quickly made these stencils of Titanic deck chairs and put them on my rooftop. And it was during COVID also, and it just seemed like this hellish moment. Another strategy that I wanted to mention in terms of working with people, I curate shows now and then, but it's really more like orchestrating something. 90 artists and poets participated in this. We had taken care of my mom for 8 years, and it was really a challenge for me. So I was looking toward other creative people to express in this exhibit about their mothers, not about being a mother, but about their mothers and whoever that might be. And because it's not necessarily a biological mother. And so the show was really meant to pull together all sorts of thoughts of what it was. So there weren't too many Hallmark cards or anything. And so to get people to come to the show, every day I offered something up. In this case, I'm offering free haircuts. And I did tell people on Facebook that I did not know how to cut hair, but I did have some sharp scissors. So the idea was that I would hand out bag lunches. I gave advice one day, all the types of things you conventionally think of a mom might do. And as I said, my daughter Zoe is also always like part of these projects. She was a teenager here. This is a project where I asked youth to interview elders and to dissect that interview into parts, meaning what color, what texture, what font style you would use, what object, what pattern. And so these are actually read up and down as a singular portrait, or this way, all around the room, you can read what all the symbols are together. And on the glass line are all the projects that the people made using a jar as a container. One thing that comes up working with people, I was asked to work with youth at this Cookson Artist Fellowship program. And I realized that because I was working with teens and I had a teenager, so I knew what teens are generally like, that they always are thinking about themselves. And rather than fighting that, I embrace that idea. So the strategy for this project is actually to start in the middle with somebody you have as a hero or a role model, and to work out and out and out so that then you do a trophy about your room, then you did something about your house, then you did something about your general area of your neighborhood. Then we went on a huge walk around where this gallery was, where we were going to be exhibiting. And lastly, I had my friend Peter Del Rosso come in and talk about the universe. He's a rocket scientist. So the sense of this construction is that you start with the self and you work out so that you then start seeing these connections between all that. So I did a residency also at Marlborough School, and you know, the students made projects, and we were mostly talking about the environment, but I had these different ways of making projects that we would talk about. And there was an exhibit there. They have a really nice gallery at that school. But the thing that I kept thinking when I was doing this project is that these young people, they're actually the ones that are going to be replacing me. I had such a strong sense of that because they were all, you know, they were all very knowledgeable about art because of the nature of this school and you know, upper class kind of school. So they all had gone to many museums and galleries all their lives, and they all had, you know, great skills, great ideas. And so what I ended up doing, again, I just, again, wanted to embrace this idea. So I decided that I was going to put up one of my video walls as part of the exhibit, and that the show would really be in two phases. One would be, what I had made put up in the exhibit. And then the other, as a symbolic gesture, each student would replace me. So they were doing projects about themselves and the environment. I was doing the same sort of thing with their projects, that they would maybe start within their own soul and work outward to the broader idea of the environment. And this is a time lapse of me doing this weaving that incorporates all the projects that they had made during my stay at this residency, and then really replacing me. And even in my piece, where I had two videos, it became a video of that the students had done. Oh, I guess I cut that off too quick, sorry. So this project Mary had mentioned also, and I will get to it, the walk a mile in my shoes, but I wanted to then pull out some ideas of working with community. I was asked to be on a short list for a public art project, and it was going to have to focus on Martin Luther King, and it was in part because of the location on Martin Luther King Boulevard. And I was searching around, and I was thinking of that idea of walk a mile in my shoes, and all of a sudden I come upon this photo that you see on the right of all these shoes, and it was a little snapshot that had been taken by a church group, and it said that they were the shoes of the civil rights marchers. And after a while, I was able to locate these, and Zernona Clayton, who you see in the orange jacket, turns out she had this beautiful collection, and she did a lot of administrator work for Martin Luther King, and was also really well known in Atlanta as a newscaster. And I reached her and I asked her if I could go there with my husband, Ken Marchiono, who is a photographer, and could we photograph these shoes? And I didn't even ask her how many pairs she had. I just knew that if it was just what I saw in these two pictures, I was happy. It turned out there were 60 pairs of shoes, and image tiles are made of each pair of shoes. And on this 6-foot diameter platform are short biographies about each of these people, as well as other images related to Dr. King. And I was particularly interested in what they had done when they were teenagers. A lot of the work in this project and others, I really always want a teenager to see the piece and just think in their head, oh, I could do that. And I wanted to show you this because Idris Elba and his wife saw that piece and went there and were very moved by it. And so they did a campaign called Walk a Mile in My Shoes with Louboutin. And I wouldn't have thought anything of it, except that they did keep crediting that he had been to that piece. And I mention it here because I'm always really in awe how any art we make has these extended lives. Sometimes we don't even know about it. And the fact that this messaging begins to expand into, with people that you don't even ever get to meet, strangers, all sorts of people. The second site has a replica of Dr. King's marching shoes. He had 2 pairs of shoes, actually, that he was fond of, and you can see them in Atlanta, actually. And in the other site on Jefferson, it's photographs of shoes of local activists. And one of the best things for me with the public artwork, especially a piece like this, when some of these activists that I was interested in, showing and portraying, when they weren't alive anymore, I worked with their families, and they helped me pick out shoes. In this case, Do-san is from the early 1900s. He was a Korean activist, and we looked at a place where they rented out costumes for film, and I located the pair of shoes that were identical in look to the one that they had in one of their photographs of their grandfather, and in this case Susan's dad. And I go to these sites sometimes and I clean up. I can't think of a better way to spend a day. This one was with the health department, and the great thing in a lot of these cases, like, wow, how did I get to go and meet all these wonderful caretakers and people and administrators and all these people. And so in this case, I don't know if some of you know what sand play therapy is. It's when little kids are traumatized and they really can't express in words what they're feeling or what happened or how they're envisioning what's going on within themselves right then. But it's actually sand with a room full of hundreds of toy objects and miniature objects that they use to build up a story within the sand. And so they allowed me to photograph kids doing it. And I love this particular child because it's really more about the sand than the object. And then I'll show you, you can see on the right, that's more the way the sand play therapy goes, where they pull these different objects off the shelf and tell their story. So in that wall, there's different videos. There's videos of the kids doing the sand play therapy, and going horizontally like this is actually the history of mental health and the way we have approached it since the beginning. And this piece was really a commission. I was asked to do something to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Mental Health Care Act that was enacted by JFK. And this is a permanent piece that does get moved around to different health clinics in the city. I think I'm going to skip printed matter. Maybe you can just see this, but I do think printed matter is a really great way to distribute ideas. I think that I do concern about like not printing too much paper and trying to do it recycled stuff, or when I can do it in my own studio, I can often do things on handmade paper and so on. But I also do think it's a great way to communicate with people. This mass commute one is really, in the end, to try to encourage people to use other forms of transportation. It was given out to people that were using buses as the way they were getting around, but it also leads you to frugalworld.org, which is one of the websites that I developed to talk about the idea of consumption and other projects people do about the issues and so on. And I don't know, Mary, it's 5 till. Shall I stop or?
Well, try to wrap it up in the next 5 minutes. How about that?
I'll say one more thing.
Yeah.
Participants as audience, my husband Ken and I talk about this all the time. So the idea that in this case, there's a paper person made out of the one day of trash from this high school, and the figure is made scaled to that amount of trash, but it is exhibited back to them. in their gallery. And I think for me, that's the critical part of some of these projects like this. Same with this one's a permanent piece in the California Science Center. Here's the trash generated by people on Earth Day. And then the figure is made of that size. It's actually 48 feet long, so it's quite long. So anybody returning can sometimes see something they threw out. And the one that I did at that school, you can actually see me get all the trash that week. The principal let me do the dumpster diving for a week. Oh, there we go. California Science Center. And lastly, I'll do this last because we did, it did come up. These are ideas about having experience be part of how people start to understand something. In this case, I worked with people coming out of domestic violence situations. And the idea was based on the idea of the pearl, where there's an irritant in an oyster, but it brings forth this beautiful gem. And so I think the strength actually of this project was that it was hard to do, not only mentally, but it really had to do with sort of beginning 3D design sculpture projects, so that all the participants, when we would have these workshops, really were starting to help each other, because we used drills and rasps. They had to learn how to mix plaster, and there were different ideas that some were maybe easier like this, like pick an empowering color and wrap what happened in this message. So some of it was more direct. It was a little more difficult. Sometimes people had to help each other with these gauze. The idea was that you would bring or select a symbol of the abuser, write what had happened on Mylar paper. So you're kind of looking at yourself when you're writing this story, crumble it up, wrap it up, and ultimately with the plaster, make this beautiful pearl from it. And part of the thing for me, because I had come out of a family situation, so I understood how these stories go, we just start to become these stories, and they really can sort of limit what one thinks about oneself. So the story is important. It's important to share it, safely with other people, but it also has to be something that is used as a growth for oneself, not confining oneself or limiting oneself in the way they picture who they are. So the pearls ended up all very different from each other. I made this illustration here with this kind of concentric circle that happens in any of these projects where, the funders play an important role. The organization does, the key artist who's in a project also, workshops play a part, and all these layers really function together. And these are some of the images of the piece installed. It still gets installed. I just installed part of it at the Fresno Art Museum, and I'm hoping that it'll be part of the social furniture exhibit at Cal State LA that I'm working with Mika Cho about. And after we did the workshop, I had people talk into a microphone rather than write, to tell what advice they would give their younger self. And actually that one, Always Keep Spare Keys, has to be my all-time favorite, because it has so many layers of meaning in it. And I did find that audio taping people allowed people to be a little more open. When you ask people, I think in workshops, to write down their thoughts on something, it just strikes me that everybody gets kind of self-conscious. They either are a good writer or they're not, or they want to be more poetic, or they wish they were, knew more metaphors. And And just speaking to one another and audio taping really takes that pressure off.
Wow.
And guess I'm still going here. So leaf leaf, it's 450 leaves, all made 5 times their normal size, with the name of the tree and its original location embroidered on the leaf. And as a viewer, you get to jump in here and you can push the leaves around. And I'm bringing it forth today because I'm worked into the budget that I could hire with good pay a crew of high school students and recently graduating high school students to help work. So they all learned a lot of skills. Some of them went on to art school. They got so into the idea of the studio, and the skill sets were varied. I bought an embroidery machine, so all that was done there. With all the leftover fabric, we did a project with little kids who would make their own patterns and their own leaves and use them as costumes that later became pillows in their rooms. And in China, again, working with students, in China, I knew the students made the leaves and then I had to sew them together, and I didn't have a sewing machine, so somebody set me up with a sewing machine. And I don't know if any of you have used a treadle machine. I actually learned to sew on a treadle, so it was really easy for me, but it was in this little village and they let me use the machine as long as whenever somebody needed something mended, they bumped me off the machine and then they'd use it. So the whole thing was a fascinating experience. I did appreciate that. And different configurations of using these leaves and parts of them, because after it was 2 years on display in Cincinnati, we gave half of them to youth centers in Cincinnati and they sent me the rest. So I would show them a little bit, but the best thing that happened was that a couple years ago, Joe Moeller, who does a lot of coordination of big events, he asked me if I wanted to do anything. And I said, yeah, why don't I give away the rest of the leaves? So people were able to use them as pillows on Skid Row with their housing. And I'm going to just show you this last film, I think. Yeah, I'll just close with this, that the seeds were mentioned earlier. These seeds are like 8,000 and 10,000 pounds, and they are made with terrazzo, and I had soldered the brass and other metals to make these shapes. And it is really on this Park to Playa Trail that a lot of people use. But the purpose I wanted to push was, well, if you use this part of the trail, why not go further? And the trail is a metaphor, but also this idea of trying to push one a little further. And so the trail itself is always, at least in part, on each of these indigenous seeds that are opened up. And there are various elements in each one and various ways that I was using the idea. And they're very large, so they're also markers where you can meet somebody. And I just like this idea of being out there, being able to work on these two. I appreciated doing a piece that was outdoors like that, so that once we got them in place, it was really this wonderful experience to talk to so many people who were camping and so on. So I'm going to close there. And oh gosh, I realized my battery's off. So Mary.
Yes. All right. Okay.
Oh my gosh, I almost lost power, you
All right,
guys. Sorry.
Got it.
Okay.
Let's close the session and
All
start the
right. So
conversation.
I'll stop share, huh, Mary?
Okay, great. Well, this is wonderful. Let's just
Oh,
finish
you're
the
on
little
mute, I think,
video
Mary.
here. We'll finish the video area. Okay, great. Thank you so much. That was just marvelous. We're going to stop the